Welcome everybody to the Audit Committee, 7 p.m, Wednesday, the 2nd of October 2024. I'm the chair for this evening, Alistair Brady. We've got Dan Smith, Dane Buckman, Elizabeth Carr-Ellis, and Andrew Harvey and a couple of substitutes, which we'll bring in Lauren in a moment to explain who they are. There is no fire alarm planned for this evening. Should the alarm sound, please leave via the nearest available emergency exit. Two of the closest exits are through the glass doors behind you to my left and through the double doors onto the riverside behind you. In the event of an evacuation, please muster outside Café des Amis. Members of the public are welcome to make their own recordings of the meeting using whatever non-disruptive methods they think are suitable. This meeting is being minuted, and I'd like to remind everybody present that this meeting is being filmed and made available to view in live and archive form via the Council's website. If you are seated in the public gallery, no one, it is possible that the cameras may capture your image and you are deemed to be consenting to be filmed and your image and sound recording webcast. The Westgate garden gates on the riverside are locked at sunset, so members of the public must leave the Guildhall by the side exit behind the glass doors. Do we have any apologies for absence?
We have apologies from Councillor Robert Jones and Councillor Robin Franklin, Chair.
Do we have any substitutes?
We have Councillor Liz Harvey for Councillor Jones and Councillor Peter Old for Councillor Franklin.
Thank you, and welcome to the committee. Item 3, declarations of interest by members or officers. Do we have any declarations?
We have none in advance, Chair.
And do we have any declarations from the floor? No, thank you. Item 4, that's minutes, to agree the minutes of the previous meeting as a true record. Do we agree by general assent? Great, thank you. Public participation. There are no speakers for this meeting, is that correct?
There are no speakers this evening, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I've just been asked whether we can move item 7, Local Government and Social Housing Ombudsman Annual Report, from up the agenda to swap it with arrangement for an independent member. Can we agree to do that? By general consent, thank you. So item 7, Local Government and Social Housing Ombudsman Annual Report 23-24. It's to note the report, and we will be giving a briefing by, who will introduce this? Nikki, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual Ombudsman report, the Local Government Ombudsman and the Housing Ombudsman. As the introduction does state, this relates to the Council's complaint procedures, whereby it is a two-stage process with an officer applying initially, then a senior officer, and then if the complainant is still not happy, they have the option to write to the Local Government Ombudsman, and for housing matters, the Housing Ombudsman. The report covers the number of complaints received by the Ombudsman. It's split over the service areas listed. The majority are in the housing section in the table that you can see. The next table shows the outcome of those 31 cases, with 5 of them being upheld. As the report states, we are checking that our information is signposting people to the correct procedures before contacting the LGO, so they don't waste their time and they're just referred back to us to follow the procedures. And then the next table shows the service areas of those investigations that are upheld, and the details of the upheld complainants are in the report from page 27 onwards. And also all investigations are published on the LGO website. Comparing us to other authorities, just to give some context, the numbers can change year on year, but as you can see in the table, we fare on the higher level in 23-24, second to Maidstone at the moment. There is an error in the report on the number of complainants upheld on page 28. No, not 28, apologies. Yes, 28. It says the number upheld for Dover is 40, and actually that should read 4. It's a typo against, there was only 5 investigations for Dover, so. We are reviewing our procedures and aiming to reduce the number of complaints and rectify as early as possible for the complainant. We're also arranging some training with the LGO to make sure we're fully trained on the new statutory code and guidance. And then you can see in Appendix 1 is the letter from the LGO summarising the complaint statistics that are detailed in this report. For the eagle-eyed among you, if you have noticed that the number of complaints received by the LGO and the reported by the LGO don't reconcile, it's just due to timing differences that sometimes they cross over between years. So there's, I think, 30 in one and 31 in the other. And I will pass over to Marie Royal for the Housing Ombudsman section of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. What I would point out as well is that, as Nikki's covered the LGO cases, you will see housing appears in there. It also appears in the Housing Ombudsman cases. And that's because housing is split into two separate parts. So the statutory housing provision of homelessness, housing needs register, allocations, which you'll all be familiar with from the Strategic Risk Register, they come under the Local Government Ombudsman. So the findings for housing around those areas. And the social housing findings and cases are dealt with by the Housing Ombudsman. So that's anything linked to our responsibility as a social landlord. The Complaint Handling Code, which came into force on the 1st of April, and it's now a statutory requirement for social landlords to meet that Complaint Handling Code. As you can see from the report, there's findings of 5 cases that have been found against the City Council, 2 on repairs, 2 on noise, and 1 on responsive repairs. So as part of the Ombudsman's investigations into cases, they do issue some findings and recommendations, and that's about how we can put things right and how we can change practice and how we can improve the service. So every single case that goes through the Ombudsman, the head of service will look at those findings, any recommendations, and look at how service improvements can be made as a result of that. So the examples that we've had over the previous 12 months have been around making amendments to our antisocial behaviour policy and how we deal with tenants. A number of the findings were around our complaints process and not meeting the deadlines that we've set within our policy. We've also picked up things around how we manage knowledge and information on our tenants, how we record it, and how we use that data to inform what we deliver. And there are a number of complex cases where the complaint actually spans across several services. So it is about how we can work in a more joined up way to answer these complex complaints. I think from the report you'll gather that these findings and the number upheld is similar to the average achieved by other landlords with a similar stock amount as we have. But what I would say is that we've been really proactive. We're taking this seriously, and we are prioritising performance on complaints as one of our key priorities for the next 12 months. We've completed a self-assessment against the code of practice that the Housing Ombudsman has issued, and we've also completed an action plan as to how we can meet that self-assessment, and those are both available on the website. So we've put that up so customers can see that actually, we're not just taking this, we want to get things right, we want to improve the way that we do things. In terms of accountability for complaints and Ombudsman cases, obviously we keep our Cabinet Member for Housing updated. We have reported regularly to scrutiny in terms of complaint performance and how we're doing from the housing perspective. And we've also had a separate session with our resident engagement panel on complaints and the issues and the challenges and how we can make things better. And that engagement with our resident engagement panel will continue. Within the action plan and with some of the service improvements that we've identified, it is about finding out very early on what outcome the customer wants and how that customer wants to be communicated with. It is about being upfront with the customer, and if it is going to take longer than our sort of usual normal process on complaints, to actually tell them upfront and tell them how long it will take. So it is about being more open and having more of that two-way communication with the customer. It is about ensuring our contractors respond appropriately and deal with complaints effectively, and how we link that into our contract management with our contractors. We are pulling together a package of training for staff. So it's refresher training in terms of how they deal with complaints. It's about changing that culture, making sure that staff of all levels, know how to accept a complaint, know how to deal with it, know what process to follow, and more importantly, how to put the customer at the heart of any response that we're giving. It's also about we're looking at reviewing the process that we have internally for dealing with complaints. So it's about having oversight and looking at that performance very closely. We're now having weekly performance meetings with the heads of service and managers responsible to review the complaints outstanding, understand if there's any challenges, and try and get that performance improved. We are also reviewing our templates for letters, making sure that they're customer friendly, making sure that they're clear, and giving instruction to staff to how to actually respond positively and answer complaints. We're also looking at a redress policy. So where we have got it wrong, the Ombudsman often recommends, as you'll see in the report, that we make payments of compensation. The amount of compensation that we've been ordered to pay as a result of those 5 cases is £3,025. So we are looking at a redress policy based on best practice, based on Ombudsman's guidance around compensation. And yeah, most of all, it is about learning when things go wrong and putting things in place to improve the way that we deliver our service and our responses to our customers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mary. Do we? This will be for noting, but I'll go to the floor first if we have any questions. Councillor Smith.
I noticed the satisfactory remedy chart at the back of the report shows 0% remedy. So what kind of preparation or mechanism is there in place to illustrate that a remedy has been sorted and agreed with the relevant person in the social housing? Thank you.
Would you like to come back?
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, again, this is about how we communicate with residents and tenants and people who are making complaints up front. So it is about making sure that we understand what outcome the complainant wants from actually making the complaint. Do they want an apology? Do they want things put right? It's understanding what the outcome that the complainant wants and then monitoring that we've done that. So as part of the performance management that we're putting in place and the process mapping that we're doing at the minute, it is about building those steps in and being able to have oversight of all the complaints and the timings and what we're doing about it. So that's in train now.
Would you like to come back, Councillor Smith?
Yes, briefly. I take it then. I mean, that's good to hear, but it's that going forwards, we would actually be able to see stats on those remedies and satisfaction from the complainants.
I'm getting nods. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's always disappointing when the complaints get this far, obviously, and they pass through the internal procedure and then get to the Ombudsman, and there's clearly a failing somewhere. And I think that the tenant engagement really is key from what I've seen and personal experiences in my ward as well. It's just people feel they're not being listened to, and certainly with contractors as well. And I think that's something we need to draw into that. You talk about the format of the letters and making sure they're appropriate. I think also we need to be phoning these people straight away once it's a formal complaint. Often they just want to be heard and, like you say, find out what it is they want. Just with the report, I had one query really with the number of complaints. That the first two appear to be from the same guy and about the same issue. I just wonder, do you know why they were separated like that?
It may be that it was the same complainant, but they're classified under different issues as part of the LGO process. But we can find that out from the head of service who's written the report and feedback, just to confirm it.
Councillor Buckman.
Yeah, but sorry, just quickly, when dealing with complaints, when people are suffering with their mental health or mental health issues, are there any staff sort of trained up specifically to help with that? Because obviously the communication between will be more tense than in other situations. So I was just wondering if we have any staff trained up to deal specifically with that sort of thing.
We are looking at additional training for staff in terms of diversity and different needs of customers. What we do have are tenancy sustainment officers, and they are trained to support very vulnerable people. So where we identify somebody is vulnerable and there is a problem, an issue, sometimes what we actually do is engage with the tenancy sustainment team to give that support, and that does have positive results because it's very challenging for somebody who's got mental health needs and issues to actually be dealing with a complaint on top of other complex issues that they've got going on. So where possible, we use our tenancy sustainment, and they do offer support to very vulnerable people.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from the floor? So I've got a couple. So I read this report as a bit of a roller coaster. So 3.2 upheld decisions per 100,000 residents. The average is 1.2. Not that great, but then 100% of cases we were satisfied with the organisation, had successfully implemented our recommendations. Good. In 0% of upheld cases, we found the organisation had provided a satisfactory remedy where for organisations to compare to us, the average is 21%. So not so good, but then there's a lot of self-awareness and a lot of things and remedies and recommendations that are going to be taken forward. Now, this report was from 31st of March 2024. Now, do we know, compared to last year, what it looks like now, that picture? And it goes along with what Councillor Smith said of how do we know that the remedies are taking effect. So if we have any information on that, that would be really good. But it does look like there are a lot of things and a lot of work that's coming forward to improve the situation. So that's a real positive.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, our East Kent Audit Partnership also looked at complaints as well, and there's some recommendations that came from that piece of work. And I think that the other thing is, you know, housing complaints are dealt with one way, different services deal with complaints in a different way. So I think there is a move and need for a more corporate approach to complaints and how they are dealt with. That's why we're rolling out the training and we're trying to pick that up. And in terms of performance, we are looking at the process now. We do the weekly performance measures. So by the end of the year, we will have a greater oversight and more in-depth oversight of the complete picture rather than, you know, just what you get from the Ombudsman. We'll have more of a tracking system in place, better handle on the numbers. We've got the number of complaints, but it's overlaying that with the Ombudsman data as well. And that's the piece of work that we're doing now.
Thank you. So we shouldn't be looking to next year to see vast improvements. It's a journey, and over the couple of years, then as a whole, the whole process would have improved. So I think we had one, not a proposal, but a recommendation that when this comes forward, if some of the remedies or recommendation tracking can be put in the document. And there are no more speakers from the floor, so we're asked to note, and we can do that by general assent if we agree. Agreed? Thank you. We now move on to item 6, arrangement for independent member. This report will be Nikki Mills, the Service Director of Finance and Procurement. And it says Rob as well, if he wants to chip in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So you have the report that recommended from Governance Committee back in February now for the requirement to have an independent member sit on this committee. So I've laid out all of the process for that's in this report, and then given examples of in the appendices, an example of what the advert would look like and who we are trying to attract, and the role that would be. There is a recommendation up to 2 independent members, and it's over to you to discuss to see whether that is something that the Audit Committee would approve to do, and the recommendations are listed there.
Thank you. And I think it's really good. This proposal came from this committee. So it's really good that it's come back, it's been agreed, and it's just for us to look at. Do we have any questions from the floor? Councillor Buckman.
Yeah, it was really on the details of it. I think you said about it shouldn't be a former councillor. And I think when I originally spoke about it, it was a former councillor from the last term, so within the last 4 years. So obviously someone's been a councillor 8 years ago, they'd be quite welcome to sit as an independent one. It was just literally in the last term, so it would be the last 4 years as such. And is there any way that you could, I mean, I was thinking about, organisations like Canterbury Bid, because obviously whether we would discourage people who sit on boards such as Canterbury Bid to not be an independent member. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Buckman. Nikki Mills.
Thank you. Yeah, we can check that. I don't know if Jan has any more details on that understanding of whether or not who can and cannot be, but we can check that. But I think the purpose of it is to be that independent person that has not an affiliation or any vested interest in anything that might come up in the Audit Committee. It's supposed to be an independent person with the professional skills that you would want to be on the committee. So is that right, Jan?
Yes, I agree with what you've said. Previous councillors will no doubt have been affiliated to one group or another, so that it starts to impact perhaps on those views in the room. So I would suggest that it's just not no former councillors rather than a term.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, further to that point, would it be, and also the Canterbury bid, that to have, sorry, microphone's gone a bit wonky, to have somebody who is not affiliated to or has a history of being located in a particular part of the district. You need someone who has a mindset for the whole district. So, you know, for example, people from the Whitstable Harbour, or past or present, might be very Whitstable orientated. People from Canterbury Bid, very Canterbury orientated. So I would suggest that whoever we choose, or whoever is chosen for this role, would be best to be someone who has a completely open mind to the whole district rather than any particular part of it.
Thank you. I'm seeing nods. Do we have any questions from the floor? I have a couple. I agree with the non-party affiliation for the councillor bit. What I'm concerned with is no former local government officer. So I sit on 3 audit committees, and the other 2 audit committees that I sit on, we've just recruited an independent member from a different authority who's just retired. Now, if we have that line in, I think we are losing expertise of local authorities. I understand that former local government officer of this council, I see there will be a conflict of interest there, but from another council, I think that I'm not too happy with that line being in there, because between the private sector and the public sector, there's a vast difference of what service delivery looks like and how an audit looks. So I'm hoping you will agree that if we take that line out, because anybody who wants to, maybe if they're retired or maybe not presently work in a local authority, but maybe they're retired and previously worked in a local authority, we can take that at the interview stage or the selection stage, would have a raft of experience. Also, if I give the 2 questions at the same time, £493 is quite specific. How did we get to that amount? When I'm looking at an advert, I'm sure other people would look at an advert and think 493 and subconsciously think, if it's £500, £7, then you kind of go, okay. I think there's 5 meetings a year, £100 a meeting, but 493 is just, even though it's a £7 difference, I'm just wondering how come we came to 493. Thank you.
That is the amount that we currently pay for other independent members, so the ones on the Whitstable Harbour Board. That was just referred to from that. It's probably gone up now by inflation anyway, so by the time we put the advert out, it probably does round up, but it's the amount that we pay.
And then if anybody can pick up the must not be a serving councillor or formal local government officer, the local government officer former is the raft of knowledge that we need to be an independent member.
Thank you, Chair. Is that in the appendix to the advert or the
Advert.
Yeah, so I can see that it says or officer of Canterbury City Council, but yeah, I think we can expand it so that it's a previous local government officer, but it's just not for Canterbury City Council officer or councillor, previous councillor.
Thank you. Any further questions from the floor? So we're going to be looking at the remuneration figure and whether we can strike out the must not be a former local government officer in the advert. Is that agreed? Okay, is that agreed from the floor? Those suggestions? We need to take a recorded vote. And can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Smith. So the recommendations are quite extensive. An appointments panel, the members are asked to recommend that an appointments panel comprising of Chair of the Audit Committee, the Selection 151 Officer and the Deputy Section 151 Officer be appointed to undertake the appointment process. 2, the authority be delegated to the appointment panel listed above in relation to the independent member appointment only, to select the most suitable candidate for the role and to make recommendations to the Council for confirmation of the appointment. 3, the subject to Council approval, the Audit Committee appoints a second independent member to the committee. 4, that the attached role description in Appendix 1 is approved. And 5, the budget is proposed to be increased for 25-26 for additional independent member remuneration as set out in the allowance schedule. And we move that to a vote.
That's carried unanimously, Chair, with 7 votes.
Thank you, and thank you to the committee. I think it's really good that we make a recommendation, we see it's through, and it's being put forward. And we move on to item 8, Treasury Management Outturn 23-24. This is to note the report of Nikki Mills, Service Director of Finance and Procurement, and Rob May, Head of Finance.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to pass over to Oksana Ivanova, who prepared the report.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Chair. This is an update on the Treasury Management 2023-24 outturn report. The deadline for reporting this outturn has been extended from 10th of July 2024 to today's Audit Committee meeting. This is due to the delayed closure of the 23-24 accounts, which has been impacted by the knock-on effects of the cyber incident earlier this year. As we have closed the accounts only yesterday, there are minor changes since this report was written, but nothing material that changes this report. In this report, we present an economic update from our advisors, Arlene Close, as of the end of March 2024, so this is a little bit out of date at this point, I'm afraid. Overall, we are happy to report that there are no discrepancies against our Treasury management policies, and all reported indicators confirm that we are in full compliance with our Treasury management strategies. This report provides reassurance that we are effectively managing the Treasury function within the limits that have been set. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the report. We're going to open the item up for discussion and comments. Nothing from the floor. I have a couple. Table 1, page 44. It says item A, and that's 2.53 million. What's item A? It seems quite mysterious, but I'm sure it isn't. Would you like all of the questions at the same time? Okay. Table 4, when we're looking at our return from the banks, it's quite a low return of 2.71%, and in the next item, I know it's gone up to 3.25%. That still seems quite low for the rate of return, the percentage. So I'm just wondering, that's for the 190,000. I'm just wondering, any movement on that? What are we doing to find out if we can get a higher rate of return? And in this item and the next, it mentions a £1.9 million investment, which generates 250,000 a year, but it doesn't say what investment that is. The one above talks about Whitefriars, but it doesn't actually signpost what that investment is. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Item A, yes, we've been trying to work out what that is as well, busily for this evening. We will come back to that and amend it for the next report, because off the top of my head, I don't know. But it is something to do with the capital accounting account. But but we will improve those words for the next time. The rate of return from the bank, we don't often use the bank account as it's the last resort because it's the lowest level of interest rate, but it's just like the mop-up account, so that any monies that we've got left at the end of the day, if it's a small amount, we'll put it in there because it's cheaper than moving it to one of the money market funds. But overall, we use the money market funds to get the best interest rate. We have improved the bank rates, and we have negotiated a higher amount, but that's an annual conversation with the bank most of the time. So, but we don't use it very often, so they're not inclined to give us the best rate. Did you want to do is the 1.9 million for this report or the next section?
I think it's in both.
Okay. The investment is St George's, the property that we have, the one and only property that we have as an investment. The valuation of it has reduced. So, but we get the same amount of £250,000 rental income from it every year.
Okay, thank you. So in the next report, not here, but when you do the next outturn, can we have the St George's put in for the 1.9 million and the item A, so it's a bit clearer? Thank you for that. This is to vote on by general assent. Do we have any further questions from the floor? And do we agree? Agreed, thank you. Item 9, 24-25, Quarter 1 Treasury Management Report. Again, we go to Nikki Mills, Service Director, Finance, Procurement, and Rob May, Head of Finance.
I'll pass over to Oksana to present. Thank you.
Thank you. This is an update on the first quarter of the 24-25 Treasury Management Report. And this is a quarterly update which we normally provide every 3 months, and it closely resembles agenda item number 8, but for the first quarter of 24-25. Again, there is an economic update from our Treasury advisors, Arlene Close, as at the end of June 2024. There are no discrepancies to report against our strategies, and the reported indicators confirm full compliance. So once again, this report reassures you that we are successfully managing the Treasury function within the limits outlined in our 24-25 Treasury management strategies. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. This is to note, but first we'll open up the item for discussion and comment from the floor. No questions. I just have one ask, that could we, within the tables, have the outturn figure from last year? I kept on scrolling up and down between item 8 and item 9 to see the trend or direction of travel. I think it would be easier if we have a little column just to make it a bit user-friendly. I'm just wondering, I'm seeing nods, but would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's not a problem. We can do that for the next quarter, and then it will be there for every quarter for you to compare.
Thank you. So once again, this is to note by general assent. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item 10, East Kent Audit Partnership Internal Audit Quarterly Report. This is to consider the report of Christine Parker, Head of East Kent Audit Partnership. Would you like to introduce the report? Oh, sorry, Christopher.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the report before you on page 61 is the regular internal audit update report showing the work completed since the last committee meeting. On page 64, this shows a summary of main reports. You see that there have been 4 have been completed in the period, 3 of which have attracted a substantial assurance level and 1 reasonable, so there's no particular issues there. On page 67, this would show the follow-up, whereas on this particular period we haven't got any completed follow-ups at the moment, but follow-ups are in progress, and you will see further follow-ups in the next report for the next committee meeting. Then moving forward on to page 70, this shows housing responsive repairs and maintenance is one of the ones awaiting follow-up, and that work is in progress at the moment, and that will be brought to the next committee meeting. Page 71 shows the progress of the audit plan. This was detailed to the end of June, and it shows the completion of the plan for Canterbury was 25%, so spot on. So bringing it up to date to the end of September, Canterbury is now 42%, so just slightly behind, but that will be caught up over the next couple of quarters. EKS is just running at 34% at the moment, so that's slightly behind, but that's because when the reviews are undertaken, they represent a larger proportion of the EKS plan, so that will jump up itself quite well. Those are the main points from this particular report, and be pleased to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Members are asked to accept the results of the internal audit work and make comments if required to full council. So I'm going to open this up to the floor for discussion. No questions. I have a couple. So in the summary at the beginning, I'm pleased to see that there's an emphasis on recommendation implementation. That's generally for Canterbury City Council officers. I've got a couple of questions on the separate audits. So the East Kent Customer Service, it's mentioning that we look at performance, mentioning that we look at function and structure, so procedures and process, but running alongside that, do we look at performance as well? It says the scope was to look at processes and procedures to see if it's a sufficient level of service, but do we run alongside that? Is it doing well? Is that working? Would you like all the questions, or shall I do them for each? So housing benefit appeal. So it goes to Civica when it wants to be escalated. But what happens when there are complaints about the process of the appeal process? Do we know if the gamekeepers are being looked at, so to speak, and how do we judge that performance? Disabled facilities grant, there are a list of recommendations to approve. This is for officers. How are those recommendations being implemented? And I've got one final, but if I just leave those to the officers and yourself.
Thank you. I think those particular couple of questions I'll probably have to delve into the reports and see the work that we covered, and I'll report that back to you after the meeting.
Okay, thank you. And if once that comes back, if it can be circulated to all members, if that's possible. Lauren. And then creditors, it mentions that there was difficulty to sufficiently audit this because of the cyber incident and the changeover to Microsoft. But it comes back as a reasonable assurance. Now, there are a number of recommendations in the areas that concern me, that not because they're recommendations, they concern me because they're not being picked up. So I would like, for officers, I'd like this specific item to come back so we can look at how those recommendations are being implemented, because I think it's a really important role that the council plays here. And even though it does say limited assurance, and I trust your judgment, I think that recommendation tracking on this one would be really important in implementation. So if that could come back to this committee as a separate item, not for yourselves, just for this committee to look at. And then as a whole, I think there's reasonable judgments and substantial, but then because there's reasonable and substantial, it's not going to be followed up fair enough because we have limited time capacity. So I'm just asking officers, how then do we track those recommendations? And that's the thing at the moment within all audit committees. how are we going to be moving forward and presented, even though it's reasonable and substantial, we must see that the recommendations are being implemented. So how can this this committee have sight of those, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, just procedurally, we will always do the follow-up, whether it's whatever the assurance level. For example, then in the table we're just referring to on page 64, 2.3 disabled facility grants, you can see the substantial assurance, there's no critical recs, there's 1 high rec, 4 medium and 3 low. So when we do the progress report, we will follow up on all of those. What we do procedurally is test the evidence of the critical and high, and we accept managers' sign off on medium and low. But evidence can still be available for some of those if it's a policy that's been approved, or we still gather the evidence and keep that as part of our reassessment of the assurance level. When it comes to the annual report, which we bring forward in July each year, you'll see the summary there of how many recommendations we've raised, how many that are outstanding at the year end, and so we have always been tracking them. Also, obviously, so this is the snapshot in time on page 64, and then when we get to paragraph 3 in the report, the number, I know we've got no follow-ups this period, but the number outstanding are always here as well, and any that are critical or high will also appear in the appendix. So we're seeing it quarterly and we're seeing it annually, and I appreciate your appetite to follow them up in between, and have already prepared some work for Nikki to share with you as to how you'd like to see it. But I think the story's here. I just think perhaps you would like it presented slightly differently. So we're telling you at the beginning, these are the recommendations we've found. And they roughly correlate to the bullet points in the executive summary. If we've got 4 recommendations in the top, you'll see there probably are 4 bullet points. And the point is, when we leave the scene having completed that initial audit, there'll be a signed off action plan with a due date, and we challenge the auditees to sort of set a realistic target. If it's going to take them 6 months to write a policy, get it approved, to give themselves time to do it, but also to make it challenging. If it's a high priority recommendation, we'd like to see it move forward fairly quickly. So we will go back in after those dates, clearly, and then do the testing before we bring it back to the committee to tell you whether it's progressed well, partially implemented or fully implemented. And then, as I say, any outstanding ones, we're at that point escalating them to committee for you to seek further assurances that progress is being made on those. So I think when you take the 4 meetings and the annual report together, we are telling you everything about all of the recommendations, but we can work on alerting you more quickly, if that's your concern, of any that are high risk or high or critical risk and outstanding at the time of follow-up. Hope that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you for it does for the first 3, but the creditor one, not from yourselves, but from officers, when I'm looking at improvement for the identified areas. So procedures require updating. So in 6 months, if an item comes to this committee, just signposting what's been updated, then it says the level of retrospective orders are not monitored and service areas which require improvement are not addressed. That's self-explanatory. The late payment directive is not being complied with, and the level of invoices paid on time is only being measured for the housing service currently. These are, and the anti-fraud initiative should be engaged with every 2 years. That tells me that hasn't been. So on page 67, those 4 points, if that can specifically come back as an item to say what has improved and why were these things not being picked up, then I'm sure members of the committee would agree that would be of benefit. Come in, Councillor Smith.
Absolutely, I agree. I think it may be helpful, you mentioned about the linking, to actually have footnotes linking the recommendations to the actions at the point that we've got to, because some of them are actions in progress and some of them are incomplete. But whatever information is available at the time of the report would be really helpful to have linked to the recommendation. Thank you.
Would you like to come in, Nikki?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to give some reassurance on the creditors, and we can look at the timing of everything that's happening and come back and give you an update. But I do know that we are currently reviewing the audit report, and the creditors team are reviewing all of the procedures and all of the recommendations in there. So it's happening now. We'll come back to see. I'll have a look into it to see what the timing of it is, to then give an update for yourselves. And the National Anti-Fraud Initiative is happening again now. The deadline was yesterday for the running all of the reports, and we are currently in the process of then updating them in October to the NFI website, which will then give us the data that we then use to review, and audit. All the different services that are involved in this use that to review and check whether or not we've got fraudulent activity. So again, that is happening now, and it happened 2 years ago now, so it might just be the timing of everything, but just to give some reassurance, but we will give a full update in a report coming forward.
Okay, thank you. Members are asked to accept the results of the internal audit work and make comments, which we have, and some things are going to be brought forward. And I think it's been taken on board that we would like to see recommendation tracking to come to this committee, because in all the other audit committees I'm shouting this from the rafters. There's no point in having an audit if you don't follow the recommendations. It's toothless and pointless, and the whole point of this committee is to make sure that we're carrying out what your judgments. So we can have a recorded vote. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Smith, thank you.
That's carried unanimously, Chair, with 7 votes.
Thank you, Lauren. We now move on to item 11, update report on the strategic risk register. To note the report by Rob May, Head of Finance. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, apologies for the formatting issues with the report and having to turn your head on the side. Sorry about that. So this report is to note the current position in regard to risks faced by the Council, highlighting any changes from when it was last raised to this committee. Management team considers this register on a regular basis, discussing with the relevant director what actions are in place to mitigate the risks identified. The register also scores the risk to ensure attention is placed on those of greater significance. Since the register was last brought to this committee, only one item has been considered needing change. This relates to the likelihood of a cyber incident, with the score reducing from 25 to 15, with management team satisfied that with the additional safeguards now in place, the likelihood of a successful attack being reduced to 3. Successful is probably the wrong word, but you know what I mean. The details of these mitigations can be seen in the appendix. It is important to continue to highlight the 2 remaining high risks, being the budget challenges and the compliance of housing stock. Full details of the risks, mitigations and scoring can be found in Appendix 2 to this report, and I'm happy to take your questions or get further details from the responsible officers to feedback to you should you require them.
Thank you. So this will be to note, but first we will open up for discussion and comments. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. With the reduction of the risk for cyber security, personally, I'm very uncomfortable with that, because I think we're operating against a climate where year upon year the risk of cyber incidents is growing by significant percentages. So whilst mitigations are being put in place and have been put in place given this incident, the increasing risk of it and development of the people that engage in such processes, particularly when you have governmental involvements and things like that, which we shan't go into from, makes this something that I would be loath to lower the risk on. It needs to be something we remain constantly vigilant on. Thank you.
Nikki, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the risk isn't zero, which is why it's still 15. And we are constantly monitoring, and part of the thing that we picked up the cyber incident so early is that we are monitoring, and we can see when things, if anything happens. However, since that, the changes that we have implemented, and I'm not a technical person at all, but it is so locked down, and I think the risk has reduced, and management team were content that it is locked down so much in a way that it is extremely difficult now compared to how it was before. And then how it was before, we spotted it very early. So it's just analysing that risk, that it doesn't ever go away, but you are doing everything that we can to for it not to happen again. And yeah, I think we can get a technical note to provide you a bit more of an update. But yeah, it's extremely locked down. So even sometimes the communication between councillors and officers is sometimes difficult. So, but yeah, it is very well locked.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I think one of the big problems with cyber is it's an evolving system on both sides, defending against them and the attackers. The trouble is that defenders, in this case the City Council, are quite a small organisation against the rest of the world, which is the potential for attacks from elsewhere. So the evolution of these kind of attacks, this is why you see growth year on year in this kind of attacks, is against organisations and local government organisations, wholesale governments, which have similarly evolved their defence, and yet still they happen. We get that in the news constantly, and it's and anyone who takes 3 minutes checking the cyber incidents on the internet would realise that is the case. Hence why I'm loath to lower it, because I think this is one of those risks that you should never lower. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we now know that the processes have improved and the procedures have improved. So if we can have a technical note on that to explain to members why the risk has slightly decreased, and if there's anything that needs to go on a pink paper, obviously it'll be confidential, because we don't want to let protagonists know what we're doing. But anything that could be circulated that doesn't signpost and flag that would be appreciated, to just give us a bit of context. Do we have anything else from the floor? Well, I've just got one, and everything else apart from cyber crime is unchanged. The delivery of climate change action plan, now it said that there's a 500,000 fund is being reinstated, which you would presume will assist us to get to the objective that we need to. So you would assume this would start to come down. Do we know if there's a timeline for the direction of travel to when we can start to reduce that risk? Because £500,000 to go towards an implementation plan, we should see the seeds and the fruits of the labour and coming forwards. So just a little bit on that, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think I was just checking to see if I think there's a working group for the climate change action plan that will be where it will come from, of what they could decide to spend that £500,000 on. And I don't think it's started or it's imminent, but that's where that will come from.
Thank you. So we're going to be assuming that will be coming down because of the plan implementation, the money beside it, and the councillors who are going to be doing some work alongside officers. Okay, thank you. Where are we? We are asked to, wait a second, to note, and that can be by general assent, Do we agree? Thank you. Item 12, date of next meeting, 7 p.m, Wednesday, the 22nd of January. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. 2025. Item 13, any other urgent business to be dealt with in public, and there are none. And 14, there are no confidential items to exclude the press and public. Have a good evening.